Elise Juska's novel The Blessings was selected for Barnes & Noble's Discover Great New Writers series, Entertainment Weekly's Must List, and the Philadelphia Inquirer's Best Books of 2014. Her newest novel, If We Had Known, was published this spring. Her short fiction and nonfiction have appeared in numerous publications, including the Gettysburg Review, Plowshares, Prairie Schooner, the Hudson Review, the Missouri Review, the Millions, and Electric Literature. She is the recipient of the Alice Hoffman Prize for Fiction from Plowshares, and her work has been cited by Best American Short Stories and Pushcart Prize anthologies. She teaches fiction writing at the University of Arts. Please welcome Elise.
What he remembered most about his English class freshman year was Meredith Kenny. She was the kind of student Luke could never hope to be. The kind who always raised her hand in class and seemed to genuinely care, and somehow made this seem admirable instead of annoying. Her eyes were different shades of green on different days, like sea glass. Once that semester, she'd read an essay Luke had written about a family trip to Deer Isle when he was little, and left comments in the margins in her neat, round handwriting. "Great job, Luke. Your relationship with your mom is so sweet," smiley face. "Can't wait to read what you write next." That Meredith took his dumb papers seriously embarrassed him, but that she took her own so seriously impressed him. Toward the end of the semester, she'd written an essay about her brother, who had been killed somewhere in the Middle East, and read it to the entire class out loud. The room had been silent, except for the sound of her voice, which shook and faltered, sometimes dropping to a whisper. At one point, the overhead lights on motion sensors snapped off, and a few people twitched their feet and hands to bring them back. Luke knew the abruptness of losing a person without warning, how they were there, then suddenly just gone, but he couldn't bring himself to write about it, much less read about it out loud. As he listened, his admiration for Meredith Kenny translated into personal shame. It was this alone that made him try harder on his next paper, an essay about his grandfather, who had died of a heart attack 3 years earlier. After he read it to the class, he looked up to find Meredith smiling at him sadly. "I'm sorry, Luke." They had never had another class together, and in a school so big, he rarely saw her. Junior year, he heard she transferred to a college in Massachusetts to be closer to her family. Remembering her brother's death, Luke thought this made sense. Since then, he had Googled her occasionally, but hadn't found her. Facebook turned up dozens of Meredith Kennys, but as far as he could tell, they were all somebody else. When Luke heard the news about Nathan Dugan, it felt like a punch to the throat. It was a Friday in August, still and sweltering, the kind of heat they rarely got in northern Maine. He had worked the 5 a.m. shift at Dunkin' Donuts and was sitting in his room, too hot to do anything but poke around on his computer when things started appearing on Facebook and Twitter, links to headlines like "Shooting at Maine Mall" and "Suspected Gunman Student at Central Maine State." Luke clicked one of the links, and when he saw the picture, he froze. That morning, Nathan had walked into the Millview Mall with a duffel bag packed with guns and ammunition and started shooting. The mall was right near campus. Luke had been to it once, spring of senior year, when April Peel dragged him along with her to go shopping for a dress for graduation. Nathan had killed at least 3 people there, then shot himself. No one knew why. As Luke roamed online, alone in his silent house, his father was at the auto body and his brother still asleep at nearly 1:30, he pored over descriptions of what happened, of a YouTube video Nathan had posted that morning, and grew nauseated. His mouth filled with spit, and he kept swallowing it down. His stomach hurt the way it used to when he was little, pain growing bigger and darker, like ink in water, until it was so intense he had to run to the bathroom and throw up. Then he brushed his teeth and splashed his face, and when he returned to his desk, it was almost unthinkingly that he began to type. He wasn't too active on social media, though he constantly checked his accounts. Now and then, he would post one of his drawings on Facebook or Instagram and tag it nature or art or just screwing around, and he would get 4 or 5 comments and likes. Aunt Millie, his mother's only sister, who liked everything. Matt, his best friend from growing up, who now had an apartment with his college roommates down in Portland. Occasionally, Luke heard from one of his fellow ES majors, but he never got more than a few responses, and that was fine. He didn't expect anything more. That, he thought, was the internet in general, a lonely landscape, a largely barren place, but with these rare bursts of not loneliness, these moments of connection that made it worthwhile sometimes. That afternoon, he started writing, not really thinking, just wanting to connect to anyone else who had known Nathan and might understand how he felt. As he typed, random memories kept popping into his head. The boxy headphones Nathan used to leave hanging around his neck, the way he sat, index fingers pressed together on his desk, the dog he sometimes brought to class, that creepy paper, that big green coat, the stress ball he would squeeze until his knuckles went white. He tagged it Nathan Dugan and Millview Mall shooting and freshman year and wrote, "If anybody else from class is reading this, please write back." After he posted it, he sat in silence. He was vibrating. He almost never talked about personal things online or in general. April used to urge him to talk about his feelings, something he did not miss about her, and his first instinct was just to delete it. What if someone was offended he was posting about Nathan or thought he was remembering it wrong? But it wasn't like anyone would really read it. Maybe with luck, he'd reach a few old classmates. He realized he was hoping mostly to hear from Meredith Kenny, hoping that his post would find its way to her through the online alumni chain. He changed his privacy settings to public, just in case. Instead of Meredith, though, within minutes, other comments began appearing. Matt and Aunt Millie, but random people too. Marissa Calabasas from high school, who now lived in Boston. "Oh my God, it must be so upsetting it's someone you actually knew, Luke." Someone named Liz, a friend of Marissa's. Sounds like he was a budding psychopath even then. Heather Doyle, who he had just worked with at Dunkin' Donuts that morning. Terrified emoji face. Within 15 minutes, his post had 17 likes, 8 comments, and 6 shares. For a while, he just sat there, hitting refresh every few minutes and watching the numbers tick upward. 25 likes, 13 comments, 12 shares, 58, 28, 25. The attention was nerve-wracking, but kind of exhilarating. Around 5:30, he left his room, retrieved the dogs from the backyard and topped off their water bowls. Then he made himself a ham sandwich, ate half, and gave the dogs the rest and returned to his desk. 98 shares, 111, 131, 153. At 6:30, when his father's truck came rumbling down the driveway, Luke went downstairs. His brother Brent was there too, kind of hovering near the couch. When their dad walked in, he dumped his stuff on the kitchen counter and came into the living room and looked surprised to see them both standing there. For a long minute, he looked at them, and Luke just watched him, wondering what he'd say about the shooting. He remembered the way he had gazed at his father the day of his mother's accident, and over in the weeks and months after, just waiting for him to say something that would help. He felt that way now, like he was 10 again, waiting, but what his father said was, "You two are on your own for dinner." Then he walked out to the porch and Luke heard the wheezy couch springs as his father sat down, the twin thumps of his work boots hitting the floor. Luke looked at his brother, and for a minute their eyes locked. His brother already had his car keys in his fist. He was probably going to meet up with his dumb friends, Mike and Leighton, and though usually Luke hoped they hung out somewhere else, tonight he wished for a minute that Brent would stay. Then his brother breathed, "Have fun," and headed for the door and was gone. Luke listened as his father turned on the TV, the muffled sound of the news through the living room wall. His brother's truck went tearing down the driveway, timing belts squealing. A woman was saying, "All of a sudden, I heard this sound like balloons popping." Luke went back to his room and closed his door and sifted through the new comments. "Hang in there, Luke," heart-shaped. "You're expressing exactly how I feel about people like this. How do you know when to do something? Who's dangerous and who isn't? Just glad you're safe." As the night grew darker, the comments appeared more quickly and more of them were from strangers. Luke pictured people in rooms all over the state of Maine realizing what he'd written on their computers and their phones. It was kind of thrilling to be this point of connection, but sometimes unsettling. Stop giving this fucking loser the fame he was looking for. Someone should have paid attention to him sooner. A few people had posted links to Nathan's YouTube video, which gave Luke a twang of panic, but to his relief, when he clicked, it was gone. This video has been removed. Soon, he reminded himself, the numbers would stop climbing, the focus shift to something else. But for now, they just kept growing. 212 shares, 259, 326. There was another reason one he didn't admit on Facebook, why 4 years later Nathan Dugan was so stuck in Luke's brain. It was a thing that happened in English class that year just after spring break. He remembered the timing of it because he had been so unhappy to be back at school again. He didn't much like his roommate, a hockey player, and hadn't made any real friends yet, and it had been nice, or if not nice, at least relatively easy to spend the last 2 weeks back at home. By senior year, he would have found his niche, a major in environmental studies, a brief, not too serious relationship with April, who subsequently and kindly broke up with him because she was going home to New Jersey, but not before he spent senior week basically living in her apartment and feeling okay, even almost confident about his standing in the world. But on that day in late March, as he gathered his stuff at the end of class, he felt his usual unease. The sensation was a contradiction, the feeling that he was both completely invisible and acutely, terribly seen. He grew overly conscious of the space his body occupied, of how his face looked and what his arms were doing, how he stuffed one hand in his pocket in a way that was meant to look casual but felt obvious and strange. The pocket too small or his hand too big. As he walked toward the door, backpack off shoulder and hand in pocket, Nathan Dugan had been standing there, his dog beside him, a friendly lab with one chewed-up ear that Luke often had the urge to pet but never did. "Hey," Nathan said, too loudly as Luke approached. Luke realized that Nathan had been waiting for him. He glanced around, uncomfortably aware of the other kids leaving the room. He drew his hand out of his pocket. "Hey," he replied. Nathan was wearing his winter coat, even though the weather was spring-like. His headphones were dangling around his neck, arms stiff at his sides. He was a pretty unusual kid, although Luke didn't mind him as much as his classmates who exchanged loaded looks anytime he spoke. He had a habit of interrupting people, what Luke's mother might have called unable to read the room. When Luke was little, babbling to her about his ant farm or his bike tricks while she was trying to pay the bills, she had said this about him sometimes too. Now, though, Nathan was focused on him, and in his abrupt way he said, "We should go hunting sometime." Luke saw a few other kids look over and hope they hadn't heard. He had no clue why Nathan would single him out for this dubious honor, because he wrote that essay that mentioned trout fishing with his grandfather, because he and Nathan both lived in Maine, but lots of kids did. Maybe it was just that Luke seemed like someone who wouldn't say no. Luke did consider it for a second. He didn't have many friends, and though he didn't want to be friends with Nathan, he felt kind of badly for him. He missed his own dogs and wouldn't have minded hanging out with this one. But as Luke stood there, his sympathy quickly soured. The expression on Nathan's face, it bugged him. The way he was just looking at him, silently, waiting for an answer. His skin looked kind of sticky, kind of desperate. Loneliness rose off him like bad breath. Luke had the feeling that if he said yes, he might never shake him, and he didn't want to be associated with him, didn't want to catch it. And suddenly, there was Meredith Kenny, smiling at Luke as she squeezed out the door behind Nathan's back. Luke returned the smile, and she widened her eyes and grimaced. "Yikes," she meant. "Yeah, I don't think so," Luke said. It came out meaner than he'd intended. Luke watched as Meredith was swallowed up by the crowd in the hallway, and when he looked back at Nathan, his face had closed over, not even angry or hurt, just gone. Nathan put his headphones on and shuffled his big hood up and walked away without another word. Luke stood there for a minute, pretending to fish for something in his pockets, to put a little distance between them. He felt mostly relieved, but also guilty. He hadn't meant to be a jerk to Nathan. He understood it had been a big deal for him to ask. A few weeks later, when he'd been stuck in a group with Nathan and read his creepy essay about hunting with his father, Luke's relief came back. He let himself off the hook for being rude, even complimented himself on his instincts. He was glad he hadn't been alone in the woods with this guy. Now, though, hearing about the shooting, it was the feeling of guilt that returned. He kept thinking about Nathan's expression in class that day. It was needy, insecure. It wasn't the face of a killer. Somehow, though, 4 years later, he was so angry or lonely or just messed up that he was bragging about shooting people on YouTube, that getting fired from his stupid part-time job had pushed him over the edge. Luke couldn't shake the feeling that it didn't have to happen. Not that he really thought he could have changed anything. He knew that. But he wondered if in some small way his rejection had affected Nathan, made something tighten at his core. One more tiny moment added to an accumulation of tiny moments, like the volcano he'd made in 7th grade science, how each ounce of vinegar you dripped through the hole in the top brought the whole thing a notch closer to blowing up.